so I think we can get started since it's 1 o'clock. My name is Elizabeth Pendergrass, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Cost Optimization Best Practices for Software and IT Budgeting. Before we get started, I'd like to make you all aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening to the presentation right now are currently on mute, so to ask a question at any point during the presentation, just use the Q&A dialog box shown on the right-hand side of the WebEx screen. Keith will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the presentation. And if he doesn't have time to answer your question, don't worry. I will save all questions that we don't get to and refer them to Keith so he can get back to you. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we'll actually have a little break in the middle for questions as well. So hang on to any questions that you notice at the beginning, and I will direct some questions to Keith about halfway through. So I'll start by introducing our presenter today. Keith Ciocco has more than 30 years of experience working in sales and customer service, with 25 of those years spent at QSM. As Vice President, his primary responsibilities include supporting QSM clients with their estimation and measurement goals, managing business development and existing client relations, and he has developed and directed the implementation of the sales and customer retention process within QSM and has played a leading role in communicating the value of the QSM tools and services to professionals in the software development, engineering, and IT industries. So, without further delay, I'll let Keith get started.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone for attending today. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and take you through some slides here, and I'm going to talk about cost optimization best practices. And really, I mean, cost optimization is all about controlling costs and at the same time still delivering good value. I'm going to show some examples, and I'm going to provide some tips on how we help our clients in these areas. And we'll also include some time for, like as Elizabeth mentioned, some Q&A time as well, in the middle as well as towards the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. A quick background on QSM, especially for those who've never attended one of our webinars. We're celebrating our 43-year anniversary, so we've been around a long time. We mainly focus on helping our customers with project estimation, tracking and benchmarking, cost optimization, as well as budgeting. We do this through the use of tools. So we provide tools. We're a services company, and we're also a research company. The research actually comes from our QSM industry database. It's one of the largest in the world of completed projects. It has over 43 years of research, over 13,000 projects. And what we're capturing here are the cost, schedule, effort, scope, and quality information from completed projects. And we go ahead and leverage that information to help our customers. Now, this slide actually talks about our software production equation, also known as the Putnam model. Okay, really important. What we're really doing here is, and let me give you a little background on Larry Putnam. He actually started QSM back in the late 70s, and he actually initially developed these models that we use in our tools and that we use in our service work. So the software production equation is also known as the Putnam model, and really what we're doing is we're linking size or the value delivered with the effort and time that it takes to deliver it, as well as the level of productivity that it takes to deliver that functionality or size or value. And the equation can be rearranged to solve various problems. So basically, if you're, usually when we're trying to make early decisions on project delivery, we don't have a lot of information. So we need the ability and the flexibility to approach the problem from different angles. And these types of models allow us to do that. This flexibility helps us when things get tough, right? When we're in a complex environment, we have tough decisions early on, go or no-go decisions, things like that. the flexibility of these types of models and techniques are going to help us solve those problems. And usually, like what we're showing here on the slide, usually there's a senior manager or executive team that are trying to make early decisions and trying to make sure that they have the capacity to fulfill the demand that the customer wants, right? So they want to make sure we have enough people to deliver all of that value. And one of those big challenges is budgeting, right? Before we get started in more detail, what I'd like to do is ask you all, the audience, if you could let us know what your biggest budgeting challenges might be. And you're going to see here on the screen a dialog box show up, a little poll here where it asks you what are your biggest challenges, and feel free to give more than one answer and take about a minute if you can, and then we'll go ahead and go over the answer and then we'll talk more about it. So about a minute if you can. Thank you. We're going to see the results up on the screen here in a little bit more time, and then we'll discuss in more detail. Okay, well, now we'll await Elizabeth's information there. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you very much for taking part in our poll. And what we've got here, and feel free to, you'll be able to close the polling box as well when you're ready to. That way you can see the full screen again. But what we're looking at here is it looks like the most popular budgeting challenge was scope not well defined. And the second was, looks like delivery team and management and stakeholders not on the same page. And very interesting because we run into this quite a bit. And scope well not defined, 46%, delivery team, management, stakeholders not on the same page, about 32% of you all filled that one out. And then third was unrealistic cost and schedule. And then not enough time was about 16%. And so let's talk a little more about this for a second. Scope well not defined. I mean, the reason why what we found is the reason that people have issues with scope is because they usually don't have a consistent way to measure it. And they usually don't have a consistent way to measure it because oftentimes there are some people in the company or the organization that don't like to focus on it. And this can be a very challenging thing. So even though scope is really important, it really is the value that's delivered, and people tend to want to focus on other things, like maybe more granular information on person hours, or rolling up the hours in a spreadsheet, so to speak, to try to plan at kind of a detailed level, which is okay, but we still need to make sure we measure scope and value, and we're actually going to spend some time talking about that today. Delivery team not on the same page, the other popular answer. The reason what we often find that stakeholders are not on the same page with management is usually because the organization doesn't have good analytics or tools in place to communicate early in the planning process. That's one reason. Or management doesn't feel the need to communicate everything as it's happening. And we're going to be showing some ways today to help with those types of issues as well. There's a lot of benefit to being totally transparent early in the planning process and throughout the delivery. And we're going to show some tools and techniques to help deal with that. Unrealistic cost and schedule, I'll just talk about this for a second because that was the third most popular challenge that you all are facing. I mean, the reason why people run into unrealistic targets is because they usually don't have a good way to set those targets. And oftentimes the management doesn't really know exactly what they're getting into when they start making those early decisions. So that's another popular challenge that we face, and we're going to talk more about that as well throughout the webinar. And thank you again for your feedback, and hopefully we can address these issues as we go through the webinar today. Feel free to close the polling box if you haven't already. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit more. Now, these are the budgeting challenges that we see all the time in our business. And as you guys noted, as you all noted, you run into them as well. Scope not well defined is probably number one. The number two budgeting challenges we're going to talk about today is short time frame to make decisions. Number three, limited risk trade-off analysis. Number four, no data-driven approach, right? How many times have we been in a situation where we're trying to plan and make some decisions and we're doing it based on gut feel, or we're doing it based on experience, and then when people challenge us, we don't have a good leg to stand on to explain, why we feel the way we do. So no data-driven approach is a huge challenge that we face. Like we mentioned a second ago from the poll, unrealistic cost and schedule targets is the fifth challenge that we're going to talk about. Number six, no big picture analysis available. And then number seven, like we just mentioned, the stakeholders are often not on the same page as the delivery team and on the same page as management. So these are the challenges we often face. Ways to overcome these challenges. Best practices that we recommend at QSM. Number one, analyze your historical data. That's huge, right? Analyze your historical data and streamline it if you can to focusing on size and time, effort, quality, and productivity. Those are kind of the core metrics that we want to talk about and are really important in optimizing our cost and optimizing the value that we deliver. And of course, cost is part of the effort, right, that we list there. Number two, analyze your sizing and resource data. Number three, leverage the data to generate release level estimates. Number four thing we're going to talk about today, aggregate those release estimates into a portfolio view or assessment or estimate. And that way, not only are we going to be planning at the delivery level, but also at the portfolio level and also at the annual budgeting level. What are we going to spend next year? What are we going to spend 2 years from now? And we want to be able to manage the demand versus the capacity, right? We want to make sure that we have enough people to deliver what the customer wants. Number five, track each delivery. That's hugely important. We're going to show some examples on how to do that today. Perform adaptive forecasting and risk trade-off analysis. Adaptive forecasting is basically re-estimating throughout the project, right? So as things change, or if the initial estimates were off, or if the customer has new requirements that they want to factor in, we need to be able to adapt to that. We need to be able to look at the risk on our decisions. Number seven, we want to be able to use analytics to communicate. And number eight, we want to be able to capture history for the next time, right? We want a repeatable process. We want to be consistent in the way we capture the data and the processes that we follow across the organization if we can. Now let's start with that historical data analysis, right? So this is actually a snapshot from our Slim Collaborate tool. It's our software as a service. And what we're looking at here is where we would actually capture the historical data. And you can see here what we're looking at is a project that's been completed. And we've got the start date and the end date. You can see this particular project went from early April 1st, 2013 to April 3rd, 2014. So we have the schedule information. We also want to be able to capture the effort information, right? You can see here, total effort is good enough, but here you can see we've broken it out by phase. We want to capture the quality, right? Not only do we want to deliver on time and within budget, but we also want the system to work when we deliver it and work effectively so the customer is happy. And we want to be able to capture the value that we delivered. In this example, we're using story points. But this could say features, it could say epics, and this could be for an agile project, it can be for a waterfall project, and it can be for something in between, right? A hybrid type of project. Bottom line is we want to get a handle on how much the project cost, how long it took, how much effort was spent, and the value that we delivered. Now, once we capture that information, we can calculate what we call a productivity index, which is an overall macro measure for the productivity and the efficiency of the overall deliverable, the overall release or project. And you can see here, this project performed pretty well. If you look on the center chart, we've got the PI is what we call it, that productivity index. And if you think back to the software production equation that I showed. That's what we were doing. We were linking size or value to the time and the effort and to that productivity factor. That's what this is. So the productivity index in this example on this particular project was about a 19.5. So, and you can see on the scatter plot there, we actually have an industry trend line, and that's from the QSM database, right? That research that I mentioned. So that's the industry average for the type of project you're working on. And right off the bat, as soon as the project's completed, we can see how that project performed. And this project performed pretty well for productivity. If I look to the left, we've got a staffing chart. You can see staffing on the vertical. And you can see that this project performed well. We staffed this competitively. We staffed this to about 10 people. You can see that on the left side there. And that's our data point. That's our staffing estimate compared to the industry average, which is the trend line. And by the way, you can compare your estimates to any type of application domain within software, right? Whether it's real-time embedded, whether it's some type of engineering project, whether it's a web application. So QSM has all this research on completed projects, and so we make those trends available to you in our tools in our services. So this project performed pretty well. Now, in addition to looking at scatter plots, we also want to be able to look at the data in different ways. So if I look to the far right, you can see that I've got what we call a 5-star report. Okay, and this particular project performed 3 stars, which was actually very good. It performed in the top 28% in the industry, 5 stars being top 10%. So what we see here is, we captured a little bit of historical data. We were able to calculate our productivity, see how the project performed, and then we can use that when we're trying to make decisions going forward. Now, not only do we want to capture that history to help us come up with a plan, but we want to use it to help us negotiate that plan. And this chart actually shows a relationship from the QSM database. So this cluster of data points here that you see is from the QSM industry database that I mentioned earlier. And you can see that on the vertical, we've got time, and on the horizontal, we have size or functionality or value delivered. And you can see in this particular relationship, as the projects get bigger, they take longer, right? You can see kind of a gradual slope in the data. And then in red, big bold red, you can see what we call the impossible zone. And that's what we want to avoid when we're making those early decisions, right? That slide I showed, complex environment, where the manager's trying to make a decision. We want to know up front if the targets are realistic or not, because we can lose a lot of money and if we don't get them right early, right? So the goal is to optimize our cost, and to do that, we have to make good decisions based on a data-driven approach, and we need to be able to see what's reasonable and what's not. And we need to be able to negotiate that when we're talking to the stakeholders or the customer. So in this example, you can see the data from the QSM database and then the impossible zone. So this could also be, someone's trying to get me to sign up to a 3-month schedule, which would be impossible, and we really need to allow for 6 months. Or, we only have 10 people, someone's trying to get me to sign on to a project that needs 20 people, things like that. Now, in addition to looking at historical data, we want to be able to analyze sizing data. Okay, and this is really important. In fact, in the yellow here, you can see I've written establish relationships between size metrics to generate gearing factors so multiple groups can effectively communicate. Right, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the relationships in the data so that one group can talk to the other. So for example, if I'm in a software development group or an IT group, one project team might be building a system using agile methods, and they might be sizing using story points. Another group might be doing waterfall, and they might be using something totally different. Or maybe they're both doing agile, but they're still sizing. They're still defining the value differently than the other group. So what we want to try to do is bring them on the same page. So in this example, you can see a scatter plot again from the QSM tools. You can see on the vertical, we've got number of function points, and on the horizontal, we have number of business requirements. So you can see the relationship of business requirements to function points. And you can see these estimates here for size that 10 business requirements is equivalent to around 30 to 40 function points in this example. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring some consistency to the way we measure size and the way we define what we have to deliver for the customer. In addition to that, we want to be able to study the way we allocate resources. Okay, so we want to be able to capture historical data. We want to be able to use it to negotiate. We want to be able to capture sizing information, and we want to be able to capture resource information. And you can see here, this chart from the QSM tools shows us a view that shows us the effort, the estimate for the effort by role by month that we're going to spend. So these are estimates, and you can see to the left here, we've got multiple development methods. We have Agile, we have Waterfall, we have custom software, we have package implementations, right? We have IT development projects, all different types of projects, and they can be staffed in multiple ways. So we want to be able to figure out up front, how do we typically allocate people to a project so that we can do a better job of optimizing our costs. Now, in addition to that, the way we manage resources can also affect quality. For example, oftentimes we find that smaller team sizes and therefore lower costs can mean less defects and a higher quality product. And this is really important. So something to consider when making these types of resource decisions, right? When we're trying to decide, should we add more people or should we let the schedule slip a little bit? You know, those types of trade-offs. We're going to talk more about that as we go through this. Now, capture your historical data, analyze the sizing information, and analyze the resource information. And now we're going to use that to generate release level estimates initially, right? To make those early decisions. And you can see here that I actually ran some estimates. I ran an estimate using that data. And you can see this snapshot here again from Slim Collaborate. That's our software as a service tool. Slim, incidentally, is an acronym for Software Lifecycle Management. That's our suite of tools. Okay, so Slim Collaborate is our cloud-based software as a service. And you can see I've run an estimate here. And you can see the far left chart, I've got the staffing view. And you can see in gold, my estimate for staffing was 25 people. And you can see in green an estimate that QSM is saying, the QSM models are saying, hey, 25 people might not be enough in this situation. We might want to allow for a little bit more, a few more people, a little bit more effort in our budget, right? So the QSM model in this example is saying, let's have 30 people versus 25. Okay, now, this is not always going to be the story. It was in this example. A lot of times it's better to have less people, right? Because as you add people, a lot of times we see there's a diminishing returns when we add people, right? But in this example, the QSM model is saying, we probably should allow for a few more people to make this project less risky. If I look to the center, I can see another chart, and you can see that this whole dashboard is called a feasibility assessment because it's kind of a high-level estimate assessment, right? Giving us numbers on what the project should cost, how long it should take, and how high we should staff it up, things like that. There's two columns here. The gold column is my estimate, right? For like you could see the gold here was my staffing estimate. The gold column is my overall estimate, and it's showing 6 months. That was my target. Total cost about $3.1 million, right? And then so time, effort, and you can see what my productivity was. My productivity index that I'm assuming here is a 24.5. And QSM is saying, the QSM model in this example is saying I should probably allow for a little more time and effort, and maybe I shouldn't count on such a high productivity because maybe I haven't achieved that in the past. Okay, so we've got my estimate, which is a little bit risky, and then the QSM models are telling me within Slim Collaborate saying I should probably budget a little bit more for this just to be on the safe side. If I look to the right, the final chart on this screen here, you can see the scatter plot. And again, gold is my estimate. And then you can see the industry trend line. And you can see, again, this estimate, same estimate as on these charts, just in a different view, is saying that it's a little bit risky. I'm probably not allowing for enough effort to get this project done. Now, this could be an in-house project or it could be a vendor. Vendor could be coming in with a price that's probably not going to happen, right? It's probably the vendor's trying to be competitive, and maybe they're coming in low. Now, a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, the vendor might come in higher they'll come in with a higher price, and you can use these tools to figure out, which vendor is more realistic. Should we go with the low price vendor, or is that too risky? Now, we're going to go ahead, I'm going to pause now just to see if there are any questions. Try to get this as interactive as possible. We want to hear your feedback and hear your questions, and then we'll answer those, and then we'll move forward. So please, if you have some questions, go ahead and let Elizabeth know. Thank you.
Yeah, you can just use the Q&A dialog box. I know we already had one question about whether or not the slides will be available, and I'll have that available for download along with the replay next week. So I'll send you all a link to that if there's anything that you missed or if you want to go over this again. I think we have one question so far. It's where does your industry data come from?
Great question. The industry data from that research database that we talked about comes from the work that we do with our customers. So we provide tools and services, and we work very closely with our customers, and oftentimes we're helping them with those early estimates that I mentioned. And remember, we provide those industry trend lines, and a lot of our clients like to be part of those trend views, and they like to see themselves reflected in the data. And so by permission, all of the data comes from our client work, and then we're able to use that information to help them with their portfolio and release level types of estimates and their cost optimization analysis and things like that.
What are some of the characteristics of industry types in your data set?
Okay, so what kind of characteristics? So it's a large database of completed projects, and it varies. It spans all of the software development application domains. So some of them might be so really any type of software project that you're working on. Also, we have a lot of IT projects as well, IT development types of projects. So kind of at a high level, that's what it encompasses. And then at a little more detailed level, we have projects that are engineering based, business application based. We have agile projects. We have waterfall projects. Some of the application domains that we support, real-time embedded, web applications, custom development. We have helped clients evaluate vendor bids. We do in-house. We estimate in-house development projects. We have telecom. It's really any type of software development or software delivery, package implementations, things like that, as well as IT types of projects.
How do your data relate to other metric sets like ISBSG? I'm wondering how representative it is of the higher education IT space.
Well, it compares really well to the ISG, or I forgot the total acronym. Could you say that one more time, Elizabeth?
The ISBSG.
There you go, the ISBSG database. So it compares really well to that. I mean, I'm not familiar directly with it, but I know that we have. I guess I'm not able to speak to that particular database, but I can say that we've been around since the late 70s, and we've been capturing historical data for over 40 years, and all different types of software and IT types of projects. And so how does it compare? I'm not really sure. I can't really speak to the ISBSG database, but I can talk about us, and that we capture, we focus on, we go through a very strict validation process. We make sure that we have complete information on each project before we include it in our research. So that includes sizing information, functionality, right? And that can be any type of sizing metric that you would have, whether it's lines of code, it might be story points, it might be business requirements, it might be features, it might be epics. We support all software sizing metrics. We also capture effort information from person hours of effort and to person days, person weeks, person months. We capture cost information, obviously, because we help our clients with cost optimization, schedule information, sizing information, scope, quality, defect information. So anything really related to a project deliverable or portfolio delivery. Hope that answered it okay. By the way, if you can always reach out to me offline as well, and we can talk directly, and I can go into more detail.
Okay, I think we've actually got a few questions now, and Keith, you can tell me whether how many more questions you want to take before you continue. I don't want to mess up the flow of your presentation, but I think we'll get to all of these, but you let me know how many more you'd like to take now and how many later.
How about we take one more now, and then we take the rest towards the end? Is that okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. I just want to make sure I get all the material.
These are great though, guys. Keep them coming. And how do we plan for projects that are brand new and have no historic data?
Okay, great question. So that's where we would leverage that QSM research data. So what we would do is we would go in and we would generate estimates based on the typical cost and schedule and effort numbers from other people in your business that are similar to you. And that so new estimate, you're doing a proposal. That's kind of a really popular area for us. We would go in and we would generate a high level estimate first based on the industry data, and then we would use the models within the tools to manage the uncertainty. So for example, the first estimate we run, assuming you have no historical data at all, might be our 50% solution, right? So maybe the 50% solution is, we're going to get done in 6 months with 10 people. Now, if we have the luxury, we'll run another estimate again as we get deeper into the project. And as you start gathering information, so our SLIM tools actually encourage that. So as you're using SLIM, we set it up so that you can start bringing your own data in as well. And then it becomes a repeatable process. But early on, if you don't have any, we might run the 50% estimate, and then as you get more information later, we'll refine the estimate. But if you don't have information later, if you don't have that capability, then we would use the models, and maybe we run the 90% solution based on the QSM models now. And then what the tools would do is they would generate a more conservative estimate. So you'd have multiple looks at the same estimate. So you might see the 50% estimate, compare it to the 70% solution, and then you compare it to the 90%. So we would really lean on the QSM industry data to help us get in the ballpark, and then we would be encouraging you to start pulling your own data together so you can calibrate the tool to the way your projects behave specifically. So hopefully that answered that okay. In enough detail. Yeah, so just so I can make sure we get through everything, maybe we can move on now, and then I'll answer the rest towards the end. Is that okay? Elizabeth, does that work for everybody, you think?
Yes, and so everybody can just keep directing questions to the Q&A dialog box, and then we'll do the rest of them at the end.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about, now we've been talking, so far we've talked about, and great questions, the historical data. We've talked about looking at sizing information and leveraging that, because sizing information and functionality delivered is really the value that we're going to deliver. And cost optimization is all about controlling our costs and still delivering good value. So we've talked about that. We've talked about using that information to come up with those early release estimates. And now let's go a little bit bigger. Bigger picture estimates would be at the portfolio level, right? We want to figure out what are we going to spend next year, or maybe we just have 6 projects in our portfolio that we're responsible for. We want to be able to assess all of those together. So what we're going to do here is, number one, we want to be able to have the capability to aggregate release estimates and assess them at the portfolio level. You can see here, this is a little snapshot from our SLIM Master Plan tool, which is our portfolio estimation tool. You can see a work breakdown structure dealing with a whole host of different divisions within this company. We've got workflow projects to packages to custom software to back office to transformation, right? So that's a little snapshot there of schedule estimates for all of the above. Number two, we want to be able to, during the portfolio assessment, we want to be able to look for project estimates that were risky, right? Because, if we're doing a project estimate, and that, maybe the portfolio information looks good, but it's counting on those release estimates to be good. So we want to be able to make sure, we want to be able to have the ability to look at the risk on those project estimates that we've already run. Number three, we want to have the ability to replan those projects that are outside of our target zone. Target zone meaning, what we've done in the past, what we're comfortable with, what we know we can achieve. And then number 4, we want to have the ability to make changes if needed to optimize for the portfolio. And we need the ability to adjust to make sure that we have the capacity to deliver on the demand that we've promised the customer. And we want to be able to make sure that we achieve our financial constraints. So let's talk a little bit more about this. This is actually a case study that somebody that we actually worked with, and you can see, again, this is from our Slim Master Plan tool. It's our portfolio estimation tool. And you can see here that we've got 4 charts on the screen, and you can see that we've got on the first chart, we've got the information broken out by project over time, and you can see this particular customer had a peak spending rate of $2.2 million. That was the estimate for the whole portfolio, and we had a budget of $54 million. This is somebody we were working with, and they had a peak staffing at 218 full-time equivalent people, resources. So everything was looking good. Then when we took a closer look, if you look at the bubble chart on the bottom right, you can see that not everything was really good as it appeared at the portfolio level. We actually had some projects that were at risk, some project estimates that weren't done effectively, so to speak. So here, if you take a closer look, we've got the target zone in green. That's where we want the estimates to be because that's consistent with what we've achieved in the past. That's our target zone in green. And then you can see, and most of the estimates were good, right, that they ran. And now we're double checking them, right? We're looking at the estimates there and we're evaluating the work that they did. And you can see in the top left, you can see that, and by the way, before I keep going here, productivity is on my vertical, schedule is on the horizontal there. You can see that on the top left, these projects were riskier and they assumed too high of a productivity, and therefore they assumed too short of a schedule. So in these examples, the customer gave themselves too much credit. They assumed too high of a productivity, not consistent with what they'd achieved in the past. And then if I look to the bottom right on the bubble chart, you can see that here they didn't give themselves enough credit. They assessed too low of a productivity when they were running their estimates, and therefore the schedules were too long. They were estimated to be too long. So even though the portfolio looked okay, it met their capacity. When we took a closer look at the individual projects, some of the estimates were off, and that's a problem. And because if these estimates are off down here, then this good news that you're seeing up here is probably not going to happen. Okay, so that's important. So what did we do? We took a closer look. We went in and helped, and we said, okay, we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to go back and look at these projects in a little more detail. And you can see this is one of the data entry screens from our Slim Master Plan tools. You can see several columns here. We've got the name of the project on the left. We've got the solution method in the center. And then we've got a column that says implementation units. And this would be how we're measuring the value that we want to deliver, or the functionality, or the scope. It can be defined multiple ways. We've got a column that talks about that productivity index that I mentioned. Remember the software production equation, the Putnam models that we talked about, that productivity factor, that productivity index. That's what we're talking about here. That's that column. And then we've got the peak staffing for each of these releases. These are all the releases within that portfolio. And now we can see, we can make adjustments, right? So, so what we might want to do is say, okay, well, what if we reallocate our resources? What if we add people to some of these projects to try to get them done on time? That's often what people try to do. Or, maybe we can reduce the scope, or maybe we can work more effectively. Maybe we can bring some experienced people over and this PI can be a little bit higher. That's a little risky there, right? It's better to plan according to the PIs that we've achieved in the past. But if we can get a more experienced team to affect the outcome, maybe we look at that. So that's what we did. We looked at several scenarios, and if we look at that bubble chart again, now it's looking good, right? We've got all the projects in the target zone. We reassessed each of those estimates, and we actually did a comparison from project to project within the target zone to make sure that everything looked okay at that level. But then what happened was, in doing that and adding those people, what it did was it threw the portfolio estimate off, or it raised the cost. It raised the capacity needed. So for example, in the top left chart right there, we can see that now instead of 2.2 million that we had before, we're looking at $2.7 million, which is over our budget, or which was over the client's budget. And the capacity jumped up to 225 people, which was over capacity. This particular company had 218 on staff. So in trying to make some adjustments at the release level, we threw the cost up past what their past their capacity. This is what they were thinking of doing. And then we said, wait a second, that's not going to work. So we went back again and reassessed. Remember I mentioned in that slide, we want to have the ability to take multiple shots at this to make sure that we can balance everything. We want to balance the demand with the capacity, release and portfolio. And typical adjustments are eliminate a project, not something we like to do, so we avoided that. Slip the start date is another adjustment. Maybe 2 or 3 projects can wait to start to help us become more effective overall. Reduce the scope is another adjustment. And then, like I mentioned earlier, adjusting the staffing up or down. So what we did was, with this particular client, is we recommended that to meet the capacity that they delay 5 of their projects by 3 months, and to take 3 of their projects and implement some modest staff reductions. And that's what we did, and everything worked out perfectly. We actually were able to save them hundreds of thousands of dollars early in their planning process. And you can see here on these charts, see the bubble chart, the releases look good now. We can count on them. We know now that the estimates were not risky, so the chances of the portfolio estimate being secure increased tremendously. And you can see that the capacity limit now is within our 218 people constraint, and the spending was back down to 2.2 million, which was our target. This kind of shows what you can do with data-driven techniques and tools, and we were able to communicate this early to the customer. They were able to see the data and realize, wow, this is the impact of making those changes at the release level. Maybe we need to tailor those so the portfolio works as well. Now, in addition to that, we were able to generate some demand management analysis, and you can see here, again, from our Slim Master Plan tool, the projects are color-coded over time, the people per project over time, and you can see the slope here, and you can see when they were able to take on new projects and reallocate those resources. And then we could also look at the effort by role by month, and we could determine what the peak demand for the development team was and what the peak demand for each role was. Here's the analysts, and when they start becoming available again so they can be reallocated to different programs. Now, once we've got a handle on the planning, the estimating, those early decisions at the release and the portfolio level, we want to track our progress, right? We want to make sure that we stay according to plan. We want to make sure it actually happens, what we promised. And this is valuable not only on in-house programs, but also if we're working with vendors, right? Vendor comes in, they give us a bid, we decide which vendor is more realistic, which one we like the best, we choose the vendor, but now we want to make sure that that vendor delivers what they promised. And we want to make sure, if we're doing internal development, that the stakeholders stay happy. So we want to be transparent, we want to base everything on analytics and data, a data-driven approach, so we can communicate everything effectively. So this is actually our Slim Control tool, and what we're looking at here is a way to capture our actuals. Okay, and I don't mean at the granular level. This does not compete with very detailed granular planning tools. It works with them or independent from them. So this would be kind of a higher assessment of the program as it moves forward, and it's almost like a GPS for my software project, right? It's kind of it lets us see where we are and then where we're going to be, and it's a total data-driven approach. I'm going to show you some examples. So here, what we're doing is we're capturing how many people worked on the project each month, right? So in November there were 25 people. December we had 26. How many features were delivered? This could say features, it could say stories, it could say function points, whatever you're using, or a combination of multiple metrics. So you could see the delivery each month. We also track defects, right? We can break them out by severity. We can track any custom metrics you want, whether it's integration builds or whether it's some other type of metric that you're familiar with that you have in your organization. We can track it here in Slim Control. So we're going to bring in the information once a month or every couple of weeks, or whatever your comfort zone is. And then we're going to use those metrics to assess how we're doing, or how that vendor's doing. And you can see here that we've got a dashboard of plans versus actuals. Again, this is in our Slim Control tool. And you can see here schedule information. You can see the blue bar is my plan, was my plan. The red bar is where the team is right now in time. And you can see the staffing and the cost looking pretty good. The red data points are the actuals, and the thin red line you see was my initial estimate at the release level in this example. You can see the features now. You can see the thin blue line. You can see the red data points. Those are my actuals, and you can see that I'm falling off my plan here on this particular project. You can see the yellow lights coming on telling me that I'm in trouble, right? It's the caution light saying, hey, you better take a second look at this. If I look to the bottom here on the right, you can see the red light is on for defects. So big time problem here. We're finding a lot more defects than we had planned. So this project's in trouble. Okay. So what are we going to do about it? That's the question. Because we want to make sure that we deliver good value, and we want to be able to control our costs. So these decisions are going to be very important, right? Cost optimization, delivering good value while we're controlling our costs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run another estimate while we're in the project. And we call this adaptive forecasting. Okay, so we're basically re-estimating as things change. So what the Slim Control is doing is it's curve fitting to the actuals and running new projections based on those changes. And you can see here, got a new dashboard with my estimate showing. So the blue, again, was my initial estimate. The red is where the team is right now. The green is my new estimate. And it's validating what we just saw, that this project's going to be late. If I look to my right, you can see it on the features too. You can see that we're delivering late, integration builds, etc. Right? So let's take a closer look at this. At the bottom right of your screen, you can see I've got a column for plans, I've got a column for actuals. And so we had planned on delivering 508 features. We've only delivered 394 so far. We had planned on spending $2 million. We've actually already overspent. We're almost up to 2.2 million, and the project's not even over yet. And so what Slim Control is doing is it's taking the actual work delivered, the actual effort spent, and the actual duration that has elapsed, and it's recalculating this productivity index, right? Think back to that software production equation slide I showed, right, where we're linking size or value to the time and the effort and to the productivity. So we're taking the amount of work delivered, the time that has elapsed, and the effort spent, and we're recalculating this productivity index. And you can see that we had planned on a 16.1, but we're only achieving a 14.5, and that's why we're late. We're not working to the level of efficiency that we had planned, either us in-house or the vendor. Okay, so that's a problem. So now what are we going to do about it? That's the question. So what we want to do is remember the slide on best practices, we want the ability to perform risk trade-off analysis. We want to be able to make good decisions based on the data. So what I did here was I reran the estimate with a bigger team size, right? Because that's not, that's what a lot of people like to do. That's what the vendor may tell you. They may say, hey, don't worry, we'll get it done. We'll add lots of people. But what we find is we often get a diminishing returns when we add people. Now, if I'm doing my estimating in a spreadsheet, the spreadsheet might not tell me that. If I'm doing my estimates in Slim, that's going to be able to reflect that because it deals with all those non-linearities. It deals with all those complexities and things like that. So in this example, what I did was I reran the estimate. Instead of 27 people, I ran it with 36 people. And you can see the curve fit column is my initial estimate. The trade-off column is my new estimate with the bigger team size. So within a couple seconds, I was able to generate a new estimate and say, okay, wow, if I add 9 people, my cost is going to go up from $5.5 million to $6.7 million. Not good. And I'm only going to save about 3 weeks, maybe 4. Okay, so that's the trade-off. Do I want to add all those people and save a little bit of time for that cost? Is it worth it? You can see the guy on the right here getting ready to jump off the cliff. So risky decision, right? But at least now we have all our information. We want to be able to look at the risk and assess it, make some data-driven decisions. So when I ran the models, these is how the chart showed up, right? Showing that we're still going to be late, right? There's my new estimate in green. Still going to be late with all those extra people. You can see the staffing go up, costs skyrocket. So we're not optimizing our costs if we make that decision. We are going to deliver value, but it's going to be late. You know, can the customer, it's still going to be late even though we threw all that money into it. So that's a problem. That's a trade-off. Okay, so another option might be, you know, what if we reduce the scope? What if we reduce the amount of features or functionality that we're going to deliver? Can the customer live without those features till the next release? And so I ran the estimate again in Slim Control with the reduced scope, and you can see that it pretty much gets us done on time. Staffing is good, costs are controlled, but now I'm going to deliver less functionality, but I'm going to be done on time. But the question is, can the customer live with that? What's their preference? So that now we're being transparent. We're speaking with the customer. They've got all those options now. That first option was, you know, they were going to be late, but at least their cost was reasonable and they were still going to get full functionality. The second one was threw the cost way up, and they were still going to be late. And then this one, you know, they have to live without the features. So my thought would be they might like the first scenario in this example because they get full functionality. Maybe we let the schedule slip a couple weeks. Maybe that's okay. But at least, and they know about it now. You've talked to them about it. You've used the analytics to communicate it. Everybody's on the same page. That goes a long way in reducing the stress of all these decisions by being able to be upfront and transparent early. Now, project's done. What we want to do is we want to capture the historical data for the next time. And you can see here a snapshot from our Slim Collaborate tool again, where we're capturing the size, time, and effort on that particular release or project or deliverable, however you want to define it. And we can see how that project performed. And then we can use that information the next time we have that big decision to make. And then we want to be able to have the ability to share the data with the stakeholders, right? And this wheel actually represents our Slim suite of tools. And you know, so we support fully estimating, tracking, and benchmarking. And you can see the Slim Collaborate tool is what I referenced quite a bit today. That's our software as a service, cloud-based, that you can generate estimates. You could have your own website, or we call it a web instance, where you can have a centralized database, all your projects in one place. You can manage who accesses the information, and you can give regular updates onto the status of those estimates and to the progress of the project, all automated, all in the cloud, and all data-driven. So sharing that data with stakeholders is key. And that brings me to the summary here. What are the benefits of all this that we talked about today? Number one, what we showed today provides a big picture analysis, right? Forest through the end of the trees, right? Light at the end of the tunnel. We see the big picture before we do detailed planning, right? So before we spend days doing a bottom-up detailed plan, you know, and then the plan tells us, well, you know, it's gonna take 4 months. You know, the big picture might tell us, hey, you know, it's actually going to take 6. So to spend all that time doing a detailed plan to the wrong overall schedule is a waste of time, and it does not optimize cost. To optimize cost, we want to see the big picture first to make sure we have the right targets. And that's number 2. These techniques help to plan realistic delivery targets. Number 3, improves the ability to manage that uncertainty. In fact, one of the things that I did not show today in those charts was that, you know, you can run that 50% estimate like the person asked earlier during our pause. They asked, you know, how do you do it if you don't have any historical data? Well, you know, we leverage the industry data and we use the models to manage that uncertainty. So we can look at the 90% chance. We can add buffer into the plan so that we can feel comfortable. So these techniques improve the ability to manage uncertainty. Number 4, they allow for that rapid risk trade-off analysis. At the project and portfolio level, which I showed, right, where we add people or reduce scope. And I'm able to do that. You know, once you have a template built, you can do this analysis within a few minutes. Look at the trade-offs, make sure we're on the right track. And then number 5, these techniques help us generate a data-driven approach. It gets us in the objective area, right? Takes the subjectivity away. We're objective. gives us a better leg to stand on when we're negotiating. So if people challenge us, if you're using your gut feel, people will challenge you. It's hard to defend that. But if you're using data, it's very defendable, and everybody is on the same page. Which brings me to number 6 is provides transparency early, so it makes it a lot easier to communicate when everybody feels like they're in the loop. And that concludes our webinar, and I'm happy to answer questions for the remaining minutes.
Thanks, Keith. And we have a couple left over from before, and we've had a few more come in. So I'll start with one we didn't get to before. I recently completed a time study that showed we underestimated duration by 50% for IT projects. How could we quickly turn this around using SLIM? Would we see results immediately?
Yes, so one of the benefits to using SLIM is we can calibrate it to what's already happened. So if you were 50% off on the first estimate, we're going to be able to take that into account on the SLIM estimate. We're going to be able to buffer that in and say, wow, okay, we were 50% off last time. Let's take that into account. That's that uncertainty that we manage. And the SLIM models will actually adjust for that, and it'll generate the estimates knowing, what happened last time. So you'll be able to do it by using that historical data from that last project that was 50% off, what actually happened. You'll put that into SLIM. We have a component called the SLIM Data Manager where you capture your history, and it actually calculates that productivity index. So that's how you'll be able to adjust. You'll adjust based on the history, and the models will adjust based on the history as well, and then you'll be able to take that into account when you run the estimate. By the way, if you all have questions after this, I'm happy to schedule a demo or demos with you too to show this in action if you're interested as well.
Sorry if someone asked this already, but do you account for partial FTEs? We have a lot of people on multiple teams, e.g. 5 FTE, but 15 people.
Yes, absolutely. There's an area in the tools, it's a detailed environment area where you can actually, it's like there's a detailed environment area, and there's an area where you can break out the resources, part-time and full-time equivalent, and also different, countries and different units of monetary units, things like that. It can all be tailored specifically to the way you do business. So absolutely takes into account part-time, full-time equivalent, different monies, different areas of the world. Absolutely.
How do you recommend your clients track their hours throughout the project?
So we recommend that you use a detailed tool that you're comfortable with, whether that's a spreadsheet or more of a commercial grade tool. But that's different than what we do. We're not going to track at the hours. We're going to figure out what's the total hours, right? So our solution is scope based, top down. So we're going to put in the value we want to deliver and the productivity that we can achieve, and we're going to figure out what the total effort is. So I would recommend whatever you're comfortable with at that level, but that's not we don't really compete in that area. We work with multiple tools in that area though. Like we interface with tools like that.
Can you talk about how customers pivoted their plans using QSM at the height of the pandemic last year?
How they pivoted their plans. Oh, sure. Well, what we saw, that's going to vary a lot based on the customer, but we saw a lot of people downsizing smaller teams to try to save money on their projects. And like I mentioned earlier as well, sometimes not good to lay people off, but if you use the teams, the organizational level that you have, the capacity that you have, and a lot of times smaller teams actually help you deliver higher quality products, because usually a lot of times we find less defects, better communication at the project level, and better value delivered and cost contained. But I think what we saw during the pandemic was people reducing size, or people reducing their staff and things like that. So smaller teams was probably a popular thing that we saw. But that's going to vary based. That's kind of a generalized answer.
I think that's all we have so far, unless there's any last minute questions, but we're right at 2 o'clock. So thank you everyone for all of your great questions, and please feel free to contact Keith or, visit our website for more resources. Um, and thanks, Keith. This has been a great presentation and lively Q&A. So please stay tuned. We have regular webinars, so we will be hosting more soon.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thanks everybody for attending today. Really appreciate it.